This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review. I'm your host, Gilad Halper. Every week we bring you conversations with authors about the books and research and other things that we like. And if you like us, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter by going to our homepage. That's tlv1.fm/Tel Aviv Review. Scroll down to the bottom and click the big red button that says Patreon. Click and support us. Some of you have been doing this for months and years, and we simply cannot thank you enough. My guest today is a historian, a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Haifa's Department of Israel Studies. His book, A New Orient, From German Scholarship to Middle Eastern Studies in Israel, has just appeared both in Hebrew and in English, the latter by Brandeis University Press, and it inquires into the journey of Jewish German Orientalists to the Holy Land and the institutional establishment in Jerusalem under the British Mandate and later in the State of Israel. Dr. Amit Levy, hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So the contribution of German Jews to the state apparatus and public institutions in the Yishuv and later in the State of Israel is a well-known thing, and it runs really across the board. You know, the business sector, culture broadly defined, the legal system, sciences. Is the story of the discipline of Middle Eastern studies a similar one?
So, in many ways, it is similar in the sense that it was established mostly by German Jews, and even those of them who were not German were educated in German institutions. So, in that sense, the discipline of what used to be called Oriental Studies, today we will probably use other names like Middle Eastern Studies or Islamic Studies. This discipline was very German in that sense. But I think there is something interesting specifically about this study of Arabic and Islam, because maybe unlike many other areas, professions, disciplines, and so on, when it comes to Oriental studies, those people who were trained in German universities were trained away from the Orient itself. In that sense, their encounter with the Orient, what they perceived as the Orient, as the East, was very textual, very based on the philological study of the history of the Arab world, of Islam, and so on. And by immigrating to mandatory Palestine, by establishing this discipline in Jerusalem mostly, this encounter with the Orient became an actual one, an encounter with the Orient itself as it is, with Arabic as it actually is, as it sounds in the 1920s and 30s, with the developing history of the Middle East, of Palestine, of Jerusalem, and of course with the conflict, with the Arab-Jewish conflict, which was constantly escalating during the Mandate period.
Did they address this gap between the academic knowledge and reality in real time? Were they aware of this irony that they learned about the Orient outside of the Orient and now have to contend with what it really is?
So in theory, yes, they were the person who established the School for Oriental Studies. He was a professor of Semitic languages from Frankfurt named Josef Horowitz, a German Jew with a very interesting life story. So when he established what he called the School of Oriental Studies at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem in 1926. That was the first university institution in Palestine to deal with the study of Arabic and Islam. So in his founding document, he did address this thing that we're now establishing a new institution, which unlike previous ones is in the Orient itself, is in Jerusalem. That has meaning, that we're not in Europe anymore. So that was in theory. But I think that in practice, in many ways, they remained very committed to continue the same scholarly practices to which they were already used. So in that sense, they continued, in most cases, their textual work, especially work on classical Arabic texts, on the early history of Islam, on the basics of Islamic religion, questions that they could delve into both in Europe and in Jerusalem.
So in a way, the Institute of Oriental Studies at the Hebrew University could have existed in Germany just the same. I mean, was there any added value to the fact that it was in Jerusalem?
So from the professional or in the sense of the actual scholarly work, in many cases, yes, and they were criticized for it. But I think that the interesting thing that happened was that when they immigrated to Palestine, their work, which, yes, was textual, philological, classical, and so on. And in that sense, by the way, this is also what Edward Said, who wrote a famous criticism of Orientalism as discourse and as a field of study. So he said that German Orientalism was classical and philological and not driven out of direct colonial interest, unlike the British or French Orientalisms. But when they arrived in Palestine, when they started working in Jerusalem, their work did suddenly have a new added political value, which was in a way directing their work. In what sense? In the sense that they were hoping, and the founder Horowitz and also the faculty that he brought to be part of this School of Oriental Studies, now they were hoping that the work that they would do in Jerusalem, that classical philological work and so on, that work will draw the attention and hopefully support or interest of local Middle Eastern scholars, intellectuals in Palestine, in the broader region. Who and Horowitz even wrote a couple of times that it was hoped that by working on those topics, it will be some sort of an intellectual bridge to the East, and that it will bring a betterment in Arab-Jewish relations.
A little anecdote that really caught my attention is that, as you write, Horowitz never left Frankfurt.
Yeah. It's kind of, of course, there had been speculation over the years whether it was simply because it was just circumstances and the fact that he had a professorship and all that comes with a professorship and a chair at the University of Frankfurt. And in the 1920s, if you're a German Jew, you have no reason to leave just yet.
No, but still, it speaks volumes about.
Yeah, of course, he wasn't a Zionist. It's important to say.
So this is exactly where I want us to go next. So, as you say, that Said in his book said that German Orientalism was divorced from imperial interests, unlike the British and French one. But here, well, perhaps not imperial interest, but there was a political program about, again, I'm simplifying here, a Western group of people coming to the Orient for whatever reason, right? And how did these German Jews who were experts in the Orient see themselves as part of that movement?
First of all, about Said, we do need to say that to him, the important thing was how the discourse about the Orient, how it helped support the imperialist or colonial cause of the Western powers that wanted to conquer and
colonize.
To colonize and to exploit and so on. And in the German case, so again, Said was criticized for neglecting German Orientalism because the Germans did have their colonial interests. But I think in the case of those German Jews, most of them politically, and if you look at the names and if you look at what they write, they were very inclined to the more leftist, pacifist groups such as Brit Shalom, who were seeking an agreement-based resolution to the Arab-Jewish conflict. So in that sense, you see that most of those people were interested maybe in some ideas that were not mainstream Zionist, especially as the years went by. I mean, maybe in the 1920s, the Brit Shalom ideas still could have some support. If you're looking at the 1930s and 40s, it becomes much more difficult. So in that sense, I think they were a bit different. But of course, yes, they were coming from from Europe. They were trained in Europe. Their ideas about how you should study and think about their fields were Western ideas. And I think that in the end, that also affected questions of exclusion and inclusion at the Hebrew University. So they had this idea that scholarship will bring betterment. But on the other hand, when they had this question, there was a budgetary question whether they had a special sum of money and they needed to decide whether they want to use it to work very hard to find and hire an Arab professor who will join faculty at the Hebrew University, at the School for Oriental Studies, or use this budget to start a preparatory program for students who were born in Palestine, but they're Arabic, even though sometimes they were native speakers of Arabic, Jews who were native speakers of Arabic, they were born in Palestine, they wanted to come to study at the Hebrew University, but then the professors start teaching them and say, this person knows Arabic, but this is not the Arabic he needs to know to understand what I want to teach him. And I say him because it was mainly, there are very few exceptional cases of women. There were mostly men.
I wonder what really the tenets of German Orientalism are. I mean, is it German just by virtue of the fact that they came from Germany? Because that's where mainly there were, that was the pool of potential Jewish scholars to come to the Hebrew University. And as we said, it wasn't just in Orientalism, right? Many of the father figures of Israeli scholarship were German. But say if they had come from, America or Britain or France or, elsewhere, would Israeli Orientalism or Middle Eastern studies, would it have looked different over the years? Because of the seeds sowed by these Germans?
So that's an interesting question. And I think it's a bit hard to say because Germany was really the epicenter of Oriental studies at the time. And especially Jews who were drawn to the study of Arabic and Islam because of their rabbinical background and because they could not study Jewish studies in universities, so maybe the study of Islam was the closest thing and also easier because if you know Aramaic, then it's perhaps easier to also study Arabic. So Germany was the center to which people came not only from Germany itself, but from all around the world. Or all around Europe anyway, from Eastern Europe where they could not necessarily have access to higher education, they would also come to Germany for that. So it's a bit hard to say because there was not a center that was as strong for Jews anyway. There was one member at the School of Oriental Studies who was trained at Cambridge University and then came to Jerusalem and joined the school. But he was, I think, also in history. He was interested in Shiism and in poetry, but also ancient classical Arabic poetry. So even though he was not trained in Germany, I think they brought him maybe because they were also, what he had to study was similar to what they were looking for. I think it's possible that if people would have come, maybe not from the U.S. because I think back in the 1920s it was still very influenced by German Orientalism, and it changed only after World War II how Oriental studies looked in the U.S. and how the U.S. became the center of the study.
But by the way, were there in Palestine British Orientalists who came here independently from the Zionist project? Under the wings of the colonial government, and what was the nature of their presence here, and whether they had any sort of contact and interaction with these people at the Institute of Oriental Studies?
They had some contact. I really tried to look for that because, of course, there were those who were scholars in in Britain and who came as travelers or for shorter or longer stays. You have, I don't know, people like famous travelers, I don't know, like Gertrude Bell, and there are many other names as well. And you see sometimes that they're in touch with those scholars in Jerusalem, but I have to say that you don't see them, for example, coming for a lot of guest lectures or things like that. I think maybe it was a bit complicated because of the political predicament in which the Hebrew University was situated, and maybe the British were a bit cautious about this. Also, when those travelers came, they were more interested maybe in meeting with British officials and so on. So I have to say, and this is something that I was a bit surprised that I could not find in the documents, in the archival documents that I worked on, that you don't see a lot of connections of this type. You really see mainly that they remain connected with the German world until, of course, 1933, and then things start to deteriorate in Germany, and you have the Jewish scholars who have to leave Germany. They are released from their positions, and they have to leave Germany. And then you have other non-Jewish scholars. Some of them become at least in some ways collaborate with the Nazi regime. Others who were supporting their Jewish colleagues who were being persecuted at some point have to flee themselves. And you see that they remain in contact with their Jewish colleagues who are now in Jerusalem.
Where did they go?
In some cases, so you have Turkey, you have Italy, you have the UK, and you see correspondence. Also, of course, some of these non-Jewish German scholars, they can stay in Germany for longer, but at some point they also have to leave and they flee. Some of them come back after the war to Germany. Others, no, they decide not to come back.
Regardless of the political developments in Germany with the Nazi takeover, etc., I wonder to what extent these scholars in Jerusalem maintained a network of connections, not just with Arab and Islamic scholars elsewhere in the Middle East. I would like you to develop on that, but also on European scholars elsewhere in the Middle East. I mean, Jerusalem, of course, wasn't a center, Middle Eastern center in any way, neither politically nor in other terms. I mean, places like Cairo and Turkey, and places that were really a hotbed of a Middle East or Orientalist scholarship. How did they position themselves in that regional map, both, as I said, vis-a-vis the Arab and Islamic scholars, but also Western ones?
I think that, well, if I address first the part of the question about locals or intellectuals and scholars who are from the Middle East, so you see that this idea, this political idea of betterment through intellectual shared interests, it worked at least to some extent. And you can really see, you can really trace how these scholars in the Hebrew University, these German Jews, how they connect with intellectuals from Jerusalem or from Cairo, from Damascus. You have big intellectual names who are in contact, who are in good relations, even have, you can even say there was friendship with people who were also maybe inclined towards these research topics, or more textual, to some extent philological. So you can really see they have good relations with them, not only on a professional level of which you do see of sending letters saying, I read the new critical edition that you published. I was very impressed by it. But also you can see visits. You can see, I don't know, a person is hosting a party at his big house in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood in Jerusalem, and he invites also some of these Orientalists from the Hebrew University to join the party.
And is it because they didn't let politics come in the way, or was it because it wasn't a major issue at the time? I mean, do you still see that in the 30s and 40s when after things have started going south?
You can see, yeah, you can definitely still see these connections even in the 30s and 40s, and even with figures who were very political. That I know, big opponents of, let's say, Zionism. They were still on good terms, and they were still friends with those scholars that were Zionists because they were at the Hebrew University, which is the flagship project of cultural Zionism. So maybe, let's say, even if in their personal opinion they were not mainstream Zionism, they were part of a very Zionist project. But still, these personal friendships were maintained even during the more difficult years of the conflict that was constantly escalating, even after 1929 or after the Arab revolt of 1936 to 39, during the 1940s. Yeah, so you can still see these friendships, and whether it was because they avoided politics or something, I think that at least to some extent, yes, the fact that they were working on classical topics that were completely unrelated to contemporary issues, I think it helped, because then you can discuss something that's on the 9th century, and then you don't have to talk about the 20th century. So in a way, yes, of course, politics is always there in the background. But I think that, and this is what they were hoping to achieve, I think, in some way, was to kind of show Arab intellectuals, or show the Arab world. I don't know how much the Arab world was interested in this, but at least Arab intellectuals, that they let's say they come in peace, right? They are here and they're at the university not only because they're interested in promoting the Zionist cause or teaching Jewish topics, but they're also purely interested in Islam, in Arabic, and so on, in Arab culture, and they really want to get a better understanding of this culture, and this is what they wanted to show. And the way to do that is maybe to go to the roots of Islam and to the roots of Arab culture and so on, to poetry and such. So I think that in that sense, they were avoiding politics, but it was easy to avoid politics because you had these topics ready to work with.
Yeah, and what about European Orientalists elsewhere in the Middle East?
You have, of course, Jerusalem was a center of many Orientalist institutions that had their own histories related, of course, to colonial expansion and so on. You had the American School of Oriental Research, for example. You had in different Christian institutions that had also their kind of research elements. So they were in touch with people there, people who came, because in these institutions, in many cases, you had a person coming for a year or two to do some kind of research. So with those people, they were in touch. And also around the Middle East, you can see that because, of course, you could travel much more freely. You could go from Jerusalem to Cairo for a week, or to Damascus for a week, or to Beirut for a month. So they had this access. So, of course, they found and they were in touch with these people. And when some European scholars or American scholars would come to Jerusalem, they would sometimes meet with them. So they were definitely part of the wider Orientalist world. They were. Were
they heavyweights in that ecosystem?
Not from the very beginning, I think. At least, Horowitz, he was a very important person in the world of European Orientalism, but he stayed in Frankfurt, right? And the others that he brought to Jerusalem, so at least at first, most of them were very young. They were in their 20s, I think, most of them. So, or maybe in their 30s, they were still working to become heavyweights. And many of them did eventually, but at first, and this is maybe why, if you think that about the fact that this School of Oriental Studies was opened in 1926, at a university that was 1 year old. If you come to Jerusalem, to this kind of provincial university, not a particularly important one, you cannot really be a heavyweight just yet. But as years went by, they really were able, through two major research projects they were working on. One was a scientific edition, a scientific edition of a 9th century manuscript in Arabic. The other was the compilation of concordance of Arabic poetry. Major, very ambitious research projects, also very philological. So with these projects, they were trying to show the Orientalist world, we exist, we do important things, and we do them as they should be done, as they would have been done in Germany, but maybe even better because now we're in the Orient, even though, again, as I said in the beginning, in the end, they remained very European.
Yeah. I want to go back to what you mentioned briefly earlier about the inclusion of Middle Eastern Jews in that research hub. Obviously, as you say, the founding generation were all German, but when they come here, first the students and later some colleagues, as you said, very few, are native Arabic speakers, people who know that culture inside out by virtue of belonging to it. How did that relationship come into play? From the beginning when it was purely German, and then over the years as it started broadening its ranks a bit.
So from the founding generation of the School for Oriental Studies, you have only one person who was not born in Europe, who was born in Jerusalem. This person, his name is Yosef Yoel Rivlin. Some people may know him as the father of the former president of Israel. And he was born in Jerusalem, but he traveled to Frankfurt to do his PhD.
And he was Ashkenazi.
And he was Ashkenazi, from an Ashkenazi family. But, I mean, he was at least born in Jerusalem, which was something when you have a cohort whose all members except for one are not born in Jerusalem. So and he had good relations with the old Yishuv people, which he was part of, and we're very proud of it. So he did know a lot of Middle Eastern, Mizrahi or Sephardic Jews. Was in good touch with them. But yeah, you're definitely right that if you look at the names and if you look at where they came from, yes, there is a strong sense of exclusion here, and the university and the school in particular were criticized for it by some of the people who were left out. You have people who say, "We're born here, we know the area, we know the culture." We're educated in good higher education institutions in Palestine or elsewhere in the Middle East. Sometimes in Europe as well. People who travel to Europe and return to Jerusalem, and still we're left out. So I think that there is a very simple, let's say, maybe a sociological explanation to that. That Joseph Horowitz, he founded this school, and the people he brought, they were based on the networks that already existed in Europe, networks that were formed in the turn of the centuries, or in Berlin in particular. So the people he brings to Jerusalem, the people he hires anyway, are people who are like kind of those circles of these networks. And most of these people, they were not Middle Eastern Jews. But you can definitely also add to that a sense of maybe feeling that scholars who are not trained in Germany are simply not good enough for what these people in Jerusalem now want to do. And I think the best example would actually be the exceptional case of the one Mizrahi Jew who was eventually hired as part of the faculty of the School for Oriental Studies, and this is his name was Isaac Shamosh, or Yitzhak Shamosh, and he was brought after in 1937, let's say, and he was brought after students were constantly complaining that they come to study for 4 years and they graduate and they still cannot make conversation in the market or somewhere.
Students were already complaining in 1937.
Well, students were complaining at the moment the university was founded. Students were already complaining, but that's okay. That's what they should do. So this person, Shamosh, he was brought to teach what used to be called practical Arabic, which was not, let's say, like colloquial Arabic, but it was Arabic on a maybe not the classical one, but the one used in newspapers, in lectures, and so on, in radio broadcasts. The idea was to add this layer of practical skills because the students really wanted it, and others inside the university, but also like outsider.
Other than that, there was no instruction of modern Arabic?
No, not at all. No, this is, again, because this was very research-oriented. Everything that they were doing, it was mainly about research. I should say that the Hebrew University, when it was founded as a research university. So the School of Oriental Study was no difference in that sense. But students who were coming, who were expecting to receive some sort of training that will not only make them great philologists, but also make them civil servants or journalists, or I don't know, maybe even go and do intelligence work, anything like that. You cannot just work on classical poetry to get this training. You need something more practical, and this is what this person was brought to do. But just to finish that line of thought, when he was brought to Jerusalem, he was told that he would teach in Arabic about modern Arabic literature. But in the archive, I've seen correspondence that he was not part of, where they say, yeah, he will teach this, but this will not be considered an academic study. So he was brought mainly because of the Arabic that he had, and not because of what he was researching. And his status at the university was always, and he felt that, I think, until the day he died, he always felt that his status was not the same as that of these professors from Germany. He was always, also always paid less than them because of the arrangement that was made when he was brought and so on. So this is one exceptional case of a Mizrahi Jew who was hired that tells the story of those who weren't.
Yeah. That confirms the rule, as it were, right? The exception
Right.
that confirms the rule. You were talking about their own political views, and perhaps not just political, but their whole, worldview about the relationship between the Orient and politics and scholarship and politics. But also you said that whether they liked it or not, they were part of the flagship of cultural Zionism. So they were, again, perhaps reluctantly, enlisted to the greater cause. And that is not just by virtue of being Jews and living in Israel, but also contributing to perhaps the less savory aspects of Zionism. You did say that some of the graduates wanted to go into intelligence and civil service for the Jewish agency. It wasn't only, some of it was, I don't know, counter-espionage and stuff like that. Were these issues ever raised by the scholars themselves, whether approvingly or not? Or did they just, as always, it's always easy to resort to that position of scholarly detachment, right? As you said in those encounters with the Arab scholars, right?
It's a lot easier. Ivory tower.
Exactly. It's a lot easier to talk about the 19th century and avoid what's going on around you than actually having to contend with it.
I think that a lot of people back then as well were considering them as isolating themselves in their ivory tower. I think this is a bit wrong because to them, the work they were doing, by doing that work, they were, or at least attempting to somehow make a difference and somehow change the political situation. Were they successful? Not very much. I mean, except from these personal friendships, who, by the way, never institutionalized. There was no Arab professor who agreed to join the faculty, or at least from the professors they were interested in, and they were actually even. They came up with some names, but those people did not.
So there were offers made, and there were turned down.
At least there were intentions to make offers. I could not see the actual offer, but they were talking about, yes, we should invite this or that. And you had some cases of, let's say, visits on Mount Scopus, where the Hebrew University was and still is. So you have this, but they had their own ideas on how they should help the Zionist cause. They were in good touch even, with the Jewish Agency, in thinking together about how to promote these, for example, how to draw more Arab scholars to Jerusalem to visit, how to establish some sort of student exchange, for example, with, let's say, the American University in Beirut, whose president had very good relations with university president in Jerusalem, Magnus. So you can see that. But I think that things are maybe easier to trace when you look about the second generation of scholars. Then that's the scholars who were in the 1930s, they were students. There were maybe not all of them were born in Palestine, but most of them were already, they did not have their Orientalist training in Germany, but already at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. They are maybe the first cohort of university graduates, of people who wrote dissertations in Jerusalem and really had their entire professional development happen in Jerusalem. So they, as students in the 1930s and 40s, they need to make a living somehow. So many of them go to work at the political department of the Jewish Agency. Their ability to read sources in Arabic, or maybe write in Arabic for propaganda and other reasons. So they are hired by the political department. There is an Arab division there, so many of them go there. So it really helps establish good working relations between the School of Oriental Studies and the political department. And this becomes very important after 1948, when the State of Israel is established, because this political department transforms into the Israeli Foreign Ministry. And I also show in my book how this Foreign Ministry becomes very important for the School of Oriental Studies, because it views it as a possible source of funding and government support. And the students who were working at the political department are then, once they graduate and once they have their PhDs and once they finish their training, they're also brought as new hires at the School of Oriental Studies. And this really helps maybe even further secure this connections with this connection with the Foreign Ministry. And here you can really see, and where after 1948, the entire university is no longer an autonomous institution, which is mostly based on philanthropy, but now it's a national university, a state university, funded primarily by the Israeli state. Yeah. So you can now see these expressions of, yes, we want to help nation building, and not only by the new generation, but also by the older generation, the quote unquote the German generation. You can really see sometimes it's very common to think about these how a new academic generation comes and want to revolutionize the field and do everything in an opposite way from how their predecessors were doing. So this is not the case here. Actually, I think the people pushing to a more state-oriented scholarship are this generation of founders who understand that this is what needs to be done now. The post-1948 School of Oriental Studies is a different thing.
Mhm. What would you say is the legacy of German Orientalism in today's Middle Eastern studies in Israel?
I think it very much depends on where, because the years I worked on in my book are the years where you had one institute that does Oriental studies, and nowadays you have, of course, you have more universities and you have more departments of Middle Eastern studies, and departments of Arabic language and literature. So in that sense, it depends on where you look. I think that, first of all, for many years at least, this idea, which is very German in its essence, it goes back to the Humboldtian ideas of ideal of a university. This ethos that politics and scholarship should not intermingle, that you should leave politics outside of the classroom, and so on. This is a very this is a very German ideal. So I think this, for many years, was still a very strong ethos also of Middle Eastern studies in Israel, and especially maybe in Jerusalem. This idea that you should keep politics apart, but it also means that you can do whatever you do in the classroom and then do whatever you do as a political person, or as, let's say, if you support in some ways or consult or whatever the diplomatic establishment or the security establishment. So this does not mean anything about what you do once you enter the classroom. So I think this ethos was very much important. And I think also, in terms of philological tendencies, let's say, you can still see them in some departments, at least. You can still see they're very much less interested in, I don't know, big literature theories or in some cases maybe sociological theories, but still very much into the philology of the focus on the text, on the text as the center of everything. So I think this is also something very German that is still there. But in other cases, definitely after World War II, when the Cold War starts, Germany, because of what the Nazis did to their universities, is no longer an important center, and it will take it time to kind of rise again. So now you have the US as the ultimate center of Middle Eastern studies, but now as Middle Eastern studies is called like that because it was part of these new concept of area studies. And this also influences what happens in Jerusalem. It takes time, and it does not everyone, not at once, but it does influence, and the US becomes the place to which you look when you seek inspiration on how to do your research, your work.
All right, Dr. Amit Levy, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you. It was a great pleasure.
And many thanks to Itai Shelem, the manager of TLV1 Studios. And now we've got a request, because most of you listen to us on the Apple Podcasts app, and we have a request for you. Please consider writing us a review. Good, bad, ugly, up to you. You too can support us by going to our website and subscribing onto our Patreon campaign. Check out our archive. It has more than 1,000 interviews. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and now on Blue Sky as well. Join me again next week for another edition of the Tel Aviv Review, and until then, from us here in Tel Aviv, goodbye.